This lecture will be a high-level introduction to multiple sequence alignment and phylogenetics. The next lecture, we are going to look a bit more into detail on some example algorithms for doing this. But in this first lecture, we're going to see the problem of aligning a large number of sequences, more than two, and why we cannot solve it in the same way that we solve it with two sequences. We're going to see mostly the hierarchical or progressive method for multiple sequence alignment. I'm going to talk a bit about iterative methods for alignment, but then we're going to focus on this progressive method. And we're also going to look at phylogenetic trees. These try to represent the evolutionary relations between different groups, different taxa, or individuals, or genes, proteins, and so on. We're going to focus on distance methods based on sequence comparisons. There are many different applications, such as classifying fossils and things like that, but we're going to focus on this part that is more related to bioinformatics. And we're also going to look at the NeWIC format, which is a standard format to specify these phylogenetic trees. So let's start with multiple sequence alignment. The problem of multiple sequence alignment is the problem of aligning more than two sequences simultaneously. So let's suppose that we have a set of n sequences, and we want to find a set of these original sequences augmented with some indicator, for example, this dash sign to indicate gaps, such that we can build a matrix with each sequence in a row, and where each column represents which positions of all the sequences correspond to each other. For example, because they descend from the same region in the original ancestral sequence. We want to do this by maximizing some alignment score between all of these different sequences. And these scores will depend on what matches in each column, what gaps we have. We know that no column can only have gaps. This would not be meaningful because we need the gaps just to match the correct residues. But we need some way to score how good this alignment is. So basically, it's the same idea that we saw for n equal to 2, which is aligning two sequences, but we are extending this to a larger number of sequences. So this would be an example of a multiple sequence alignment where each sequence is here in one row, one line, augmented by these gap indicators, so that the conserved regions and the positions where the residues correspond to each other are all matching in the same columns on the multiple sequence alignment. So what can we do with this? This is very useful for things like identifying function, inferring structure. For example, in RNA, it's very important to use multiple sequences to try to infer structure, identify common motifs, and so on. You can also use it for sequence search. For example, SciBlast uses multiple sequence alignments to compute those position-specific substitution matrices. And we're going to use this for phylogeny, for representing evolutionary relations between the sequences. And we can see multiple sequence alignment as an extension of just the alignment between two sequences. And this improves what kind of information we can extract from the results, because it forces all of these sequences that descend from some common ancestor to be aligned in a way that is consistent with all their combinations. So we can better find conserved residues, we can have better metrics of distances between the sequences, and so doing this for a large number of sequences makes the alignment much more reliable because of the enforcement of the consistency between all of these. So each of these sequences must be correctly aligned to all of the others in the multiple sequence alignment. So let's see how we can compute a multiple sequence alignment. We need some way to score the alignment. so that we can find the best alignment. And we also need to search possible alignments in order to try to optimize this score. So basically the way we're going to score is to try to make it so that the positions that are matching in the different sequences are as related as possible. We have this problem also with sequence alignment. We want the alignment to reflect evolutionary relations between the sequences, but we do not have direct information on those relations. So we are going to approximate this with things like similarity or sameness, relatedness, something like that, for example, with substitution matrices and so forth. And we are going to assume that the columns are independent. This is a general approach to scoring these alignments, just like we did in aligning two sequences, is to consider that the total score will be some function of the scores of individual columns. So we may have some special penalties for gaps and so on, but we are going to look at the scores for individual columns, add everything up, and this will give us the score of the alignment. So there are different ways we can use to score these multiple sequence alignments. One approach, for example, is to use an analogous of entropy. So entropy is a measure of how disordered some random variable is. So this we can compute by adding the product of the probability of the variable having some value multiplied by the logarithm of that probability. So basically, if we have a variable that is very uniformly distributed, entropy is higher. If the variable is very narrowly distributed, only favoring only one or a few values, then entropy is low. We can do the analogous of that for each column in our multiple sequence alignment by counting the frequency of each of the occurrence of each type of residue, either nucleotides or amino acids, depending on the sequences we are aligning, and using also the background probability of them appearing to compute a sort of entropy for each column we have. So this means that if the order, if they are very ordered, we would have a lower entropy. If they are very disordered, then entropy is greater. And we would try, for example, to favor alignments where the columns are more focused on some residue types and not uniformly distributed at random through all of them. A more common approach to scoring multiple sequence alignments is to extend the same approach we used for aligning two sequences, which is to use a substitution matrix to score the matches, but we do this for all the pairs. So basically we are looking at all the combinations of lines in our multiple sequence alignments of sequences, and we are computing the score for all the possible pairs of sequences in a multiple sequence alignment. There is one problem with this, is that it tends to be biased in a way that does not reflect the actual mutations. So for example, suppose that we have 4 sequences. We are computing the contribution of this column for the score of the multiple sequence alignment, and we could imagine that this would have some evolutionary relation like this, where we have one family of sequences which have an A in this position, and there occurred one mutation and there was a C. So we could explain this with one mutation. But if we are taking all the pairs, then there are 3 pairs here where A is matched with C using the first and the third sequences, the A again with C using the second and third, and using third and fourth we have another A with C. So basically this could be just one mutation, but we are counting this as if there were 3 mutations. And as we increase the number of conserved symbols in a column, we also paradoxically increase the weight of the mutation there. So this can give us this result where we actually can get poorer scores just by adding more sequences and still conserving the sequence there. So this can be countered by weighting, for example, using, if sequences are very similar, we aggregate them and give lower weight to each of them and things like that. But this is a very common scheme for scoring multiple sequence alignments, but we need to be careful because it can give these strange results of overestimating the importance of these mutations. And now, even if we find a way to score the alignment, we now need to search all the possible alignments. So we could try to do this with dynamic programming, as we did for aligning two sequences, where when we have two sequences, we have to fill a two-dimensional matrix, which has as many rows as one of the sequence and as many columns as the other. And each cell of the matrix, we find these three possible moves coming from the diagonal, where we match the two symbols, or from the top or the left, where we match the symbol of one sequence with a gap. So this would be for two sequences where we have a two-dimensional matrix, and we need to consider the three neighbors of each cell to compute the matrix with the scores for all the possible alignments. But if we add another sequence, for example, with three sequences, now we need a three-dimensional matrix, because we need the matrix to have one sequence in each dimension. And now for each cell, we're going to have to consider 7 different neighbors, because we can match all of them here. We can match a gap and 2 of them, or other 2, or we can put 2 gaps and 1 of the sequences. So there are all of these combinations, and we need to find the best for each cell in our score matrix. We need to find the best of all of these 7 branches. And as we increase the number of sequences, we have this problem. We have given n sequences, we have 2 times n minus 1 neighbors, but we also need a matrix of L raised to the power of n if all the sequences have a length of n, or basically we need a matrix which has as many cells as the product of the sizes of all of these sequences. And also we increase the time complexity, because we need to compute all of the values in this matrix. We have a huge matrix if we have even a modest value for n, so we quickly go out of the available memory. And basically this means that if we need to align 10 sequences, it will take us about 10 raised to the 18 times longer than 2 sequences of this same length. So since the time taken for computing this, even with dynamic programming, increases exponentially with the number of sequences, we cannot really solve this problem of aligning multiple sequences using the same approach we did before. So now we need to have some tricks, some ways of finding a shortcut here. And the drawback of this is that we cannot guarantee we're going to find the optimal solution. But one practical approach, is to use hierarchical or progressive multiple sequence alignment, which consists in breaking down the alignment problem into alignments of 2 sequences at a time. So since we cannot align everything at the same time, we can keep aligning, gradually building the multiple sequence alignment by depending only on pairwise alignments. This is fast, but has the problem that as we add alignments gradually, if we make a mistake, this mistake gets frozen in the process and will never be corrected in future steps. So let's see an example of this in more detail. We'll start by computing a guide tree using pairwise alignments to measure the distance between our sequences, so that we can start by using the shortest distances, or the closest sequences, to start our multiple sequence alignment. So as we find the pair of sequences that are most similar to one another, we align those two sequences. And now we keep track of the consensus for each part of the multiple sequence alignment we have so far. For example, if we align the two closest sequences, we build a consensus sequence that represents the pairing of these two sequences, and we keep doing this. We keep adding new sequences and following this hierarchy or this tree that goes from the closest, the more similar sequences to those that are more distant. Now, this is a heuristic that does not guarantee a global optimum. As we keep following this trajectory, we may lose our way and end up in something that is not the ideal alignment. And it will also depend a lot on these initial decisions. So errors will accumulate, and errors in the beginning will probably have a greater effect on the overall result. But this makes it possible to find at least a good alignment with a large number of sequences. So let's see how this was implemented in Clastal. So this first version here starts for n sequences by computing all the pairwise alignments. So this is the number of pairwise alignments we have, each sequence with all the others, but avoiding repetition. So it's the number of sequences times the number of sequences minus 1 divided by 2. And then use this to generate a guide tree. To do this, they use this UPGMA, unweighted pair group method with arithmetic mean, which is a way of creating this tree representing the hierarchical clustering of different elements based on the matrix of distance between them. I'm going to explain how this works. This is from an example using cytochromes from different species. And we first build a matrix that gives us the distance between the sequences. In this case, this is the number of differences in the sequence. So for example, between monkeys and humans, we have one residue difference between the cytochrome sequences. Between, for example, turtle and chicken, we have 8 residues difference, and so on. So this way, we create a table with all the distances between all the different pairs of sequences that we have. Note that this is not n times n, but it's n times n minus 1 divided by 2, because we don't have the diagonal. The diagonal is 0, it doesn't matter. And this part of the table would be just the same value. So this is between dog and turtle. This would be between turtle and dog, but it would be the exact same value. So it's redundant to compute that one. Okay, so now that we start here, we're going to find the smallest value here on the table. This is 1. So these are the two sequences that are close together, human and monkey. We are now going to group these two together. So instead of having sequence B and sequence F, sequence B will be BF, F will disappear. So we delete this row and this column from our table. And we now store for BF, that is the row that was originally B and the column that was originally B, will have the average of these two. So we get the average values from all of these distances. That is, for example, when we group here dog, monkey and human together, the distance to, for example, turtle will be the average between the two. So human to turtle will be here 19, dog to turtle would be 13. So we take the average of the two, and this would be now the distance we have between the group human and monkey to turtle and to all of the others. And we store this group. If we want to draw the actual tree, we now can divide evenly the distance between the two elements, between human and monkey. We divide 0.5 each way. So the branches become equal, both branches. And now we repeat this. We find the next smallest value, which is here between D and A. So this would be chicken and turtle. And now we group chicken and turtle together, doing the same thing, computing the average and throwing away one line and one column, one row and one column. So you see, each step we are doing this, we are creating groups and we are reducing the size of the matrix. So we keep doing this and we keep finding new groups. And for example, here in this third stage, we find the smallest one there, which is to include the dog, which is G, in the group that we already had created between humans and monkeys. So now we have humans, monkeys, and dogs in the same group here. The branches, we again divide these distances. So 12.5 we divide between the two equally. 625 for the dogs, 625 for humans and monkeys. But since humans and monkeys already had 0.5 there, we subtract that so that the total branch length is the same. And now we keep doing this. Each time we add new groups or new elements to the same branches, we do this computation again. We divide the distance between them equally and subtract whatever we had previously, and we compute the distance to all the other elements or the other groups as being the average of the distance so far. So we keep doing this until we reach the end and we join the last two groups together. So this would be the result of the tree generated with this method, UPGMA. So for multiple sequence alignment, we really don't need the whole tree. We just need to know the ordering here. So we would have to align B with F, then G. We also would have to align A with D, and then align the alignment of AD with the alignment of BFG. And then we would align C with that group, and then E with the rest. So this would give us the order by which we would progressively or hierarchically follow the alignments in order to produce the multiple sequence alignment. So with the Clustal, initially we have this guide tree using UPGMA. So basically this tree tells us in which order we are going to align the sequences, and then we're going to align the closest sequences first and then follow the tree. So as we follow the tree, in some cases, for example, B with F or A with D, we have to align two sequences. This is just using the alignment method, for example, Needleman-Wunsch, to get the global alignment between the two sequences. And then sometimes we're going to have to align either two previous alignments. For example, here we have an alignment of BFG and we need to align that with the alignment of AD. So we have two blocks of sequences to align. Or sometimes we have a block of sequences, for example, BFG AD, and we need to align a new sequence here. The way this is done in Clustal is by using consensus sequences. So if we take for each group of sequences in a multiple sequence alignment, we create a sequence that is representative of that group of sequences. Now, every time we need to align either two blocks to multiple sequence alignments or one sequence to a multiple sequence alignment, we can just look at the consensus sequences, and this will always be just a problem of aligning two sequences. So at each step, as we follow the tree, we are just aligning two sequences. Now, one very simple way of doing this, the consensus sequence, would be just to look at unanimous or majority residues in each column of a multiple sequence alignment, and that could be the consensus. There is one version of Clustal that uses this simple approach, and we are going to use this when we implement our code, because that will be just to give the idea of how the algorithm works. But then there are lots of different heuristics and fine-tuning to be made in order to improve how the alignment works. So actually, what they started by doing was to use different scores for residues that are not properly matching but have some specific values in the substitution matrix. So if the substitution was still fairly good, they will count 1 for those, even if they do not match. if some residues like cysteine or tryptophan and so on matched exactly, this would count a lot more. It would count for 3 because these are rarer residues and they tend to have important structural roles in proteins. Exactly matched residues count 2 and so forth. So they have this scoring scheme that tries to divide between different types of conservation and substitution in the sequences in order to find a consensus sequence. But in any case, the idea is always to draw from a multiple sequence alignment that is being generated. For example, at this stage, it could be the alignment of B, F, and G. We would draw from here one consensus sequence, another consensus sequence from the alignment of A and D, and to join these two, we would align the two consensus sequences and use that as a map to bring together this multiple sequence alignment and this one. So this is this first version of Clustal. There is also some tolerance to decide what is consensual, so it would have to be present in 75% of the sequences. If not, if it's not consensual, then in the consensus sequence, that position is marked with an X. An X indicates any possible residue, so that when computing the alignment, it doesn't matter what falls matching with the X. The second version used the sum of pairs for scoring the multiple sequence alignment, and it used a faster alignment method for aligning the clusters of sequences. And then there are other improvements in Clustal W. We have the sum of pairs was corrected by counting more sequences that are more distant to others, and counting less those sequences that have more similar sequences in the set. They use neighbor joining instead of UPGMA in the guide tree in some cases. And so what we can see here is, although the basic algorithm is the same, there was a lot of refinements and fine-tuning to make things work a bit better. So in this case, neighbor joining works similarly to UPGMA. So we are also doing this same algorithm here, following step by step between the closest ones, joining them together and so on. But there is a difference. Instead of using the distances just as they are, what neighbor joining does is creates this Q matrix that has between sequence I and J, the distance between I and J, but then adjusted by the sum of the distances between I and all other sequences, and between J and all other sequences. So this means that if we have a pair of sequences, I and J, that are very different from all the other sequences in our set, the actual distance that we're going to count for doing the clustering here, for creating this tree, will be lower than the distance between them. So the farther away from other sequences they are, the closer together we will consider them to be when computing the tree. Also, the distance to the common ancestor, which is in UPGMA, is always the same for both descendants. For example, here, humans and monkeys, we just divided this one in 0.5 for each branch. In neighbor joining, it's also scaled, adjusted as a function of the distances to other sequences. So the sequence that when we are joining two sequences and computing the distance between each of them and the common ancestor, we will give a longer branch to that sequence that is farther away from all the other sequences in our group, and a shorter branch to the sequence that is not as far away from the others on average. So this creates an asymmetry in the branches when we are splitting the tree. So now in Clustal Omega, there are other variations here using hidden Markov models for profiling the multiple sequences alignments as we are building the alignment and so on. We're going to talk about this later on in the course, but the basic idea here is we are not going to look at all of these details and refinements. We are going to focus on the basic approach of progressively aligning new sequences or new multiple sequence alignments together by using those consensus sequences. There are many details to fine-tune in order to optimize these algorithms, but we are not going to look at those in detail. In the next lecture, we are going to focus on the algorithm and how to implement a basic version of this algorithm. Another approach to multiple sequence alignment is to iterate the alignments to try to fix any possible mistakes we did in the first progressive alignment. So progressive alignment can be fast, but if we make mistakes early on in this process, they are not corrected, and so we keep accumulating mistakes as we are aligning more and more sequences. So one possible solution for this, since we cannot explore the complete space of sequence combinations, that is that exponential growth problem that we have, which prevents us from trying to find the optimal solution, what we can do is try to improve on the progressive alignment by iteratively going back and trying to fix some mistakes. So just briefly, I'm going to give an example of that with MUSCLE. This is multiple sequence comparison by log expectation. This is an algorithm that can build multiple sequence alignment, and it starts by creating a first progressive alignment using UPGMA to generate the guide tree, and then creating this first alignment. So this is also the distances are not obtained by aligning all the pairs of sequences. This is done by comparing those words, those k-mers, sequences of short sequences of residues that are used to compare the two sequences. And so this first progressive alignment will be just a draft of the alignment, and it will then used to obtain a better distance matrix, because now the distances are not going to be computed from pairwise comparisons, but from the complete multiple sequence alignment. And it also uses these Kimura distances, which take into account probabilistic models of DNA mutations and so on. So there is a better estimate of the distances between the sequences than if we were just to look at pairwise alignments. Now we generate a new guide tree, also with UPGMA, and MUSCLE redoes the hierarchical alignment. And then it will start refining. So it's going to look at this tree that was generated. From this tree, some multiple sequence alignment was computed, but now it goes randomly on this tree and splits it into two by deleting one of the edges of the tree. So it's going to now compute a profile for each of the halves of these two parts, and it's going to realign these two blocks again. And it's going to repeat this, always keeping the new alignment if it has a better score, and it will repeat until the user gets tired of waiting or it reaches some convergence criteria. So this would be schematically the idea. Start with unaligned sequences, get a rough idea of the distances between all of these sequences by comparing words that are common or different between the sequences. It uses these distances to produce the first draft tree by UPGMA, then creates a first alignment using progressive alignment, the algorithm that we saw previously. And now it's going to look at this alignment to compute all the distances between these sequences, create a new distance matrix, a new guide tree, and repeat the progressive alignment. So this alignment here will, in theory, have a better quality than the first one. And now, looking at this tree, it's possible to split it into parts by deleting some edge. For example, if we delete this edge here, we split the tree in these two parts, and this gives us two guide trees, each one with its own multiple sequence alignment here. So we can now compute these alignments and then compute the profiles for these alignments. So what represents each alignment, and align again. Check if it's better. If it's worse than we had, it's deleted. If it's better, it's kept, and then everything is repeated. So it will iteratively try to improve the alignment by randomly separating the tree into two subtrees and recomputing the alignments there. Another approach is, after you have a multiple sequence alignment, you can refine the multiple sequence alignment. Refiner is one example of these tools. You start with the multiple sequence alignment. Refiner picks one sequence at random and then tries to realign that sequence with all the other sequences, creating a position-specific substitution matrix from the rest of the multiple sequence alignment, and then checks if it got some improvement in the alignment. If it did, then it uses that new alignment. If not, it discards and keeps doing this, and does this until we decide to stop the process. So you can just keep trying to improve the alignment by iteratively taking out one sequence and recomputing. So basically, we have these hierarchical or progressive methods for computing multiple sequence alignments, which just try to find a good order in which to add the sequences to the multiple sequence alignment. These iterative methods go beyond the hierarchical methods. They usually start with an hierarchical method, but then try iteratively to fix any mistakes that may have occurred earlier. And then we have consensus methods that compute alignments from different alignment algorithms and tries to find a general alignment that is consensual there. And there are other approaches using hidden Markov models, using optimization, for example, genetic algorithms, simulated annealing, and so on. So basically, different approaches to this problem of being unable to explore the complete set of combinations. So we need to find some heuristics that will guide us to good solutions when we are unable to find the optimal one in a guaranteed manner. Okay, so one application of multiple sequence alignments is to try to figure out how these sequences, proteins, or the organisms correspond to each other, how they relate to each other in evolution. But the idea of classifying living organisms is much older than our notion of evolution, or even in these relations like trees between the different organisms. So we can see this first attempt, for example, which described each organism as specially created as it was. And so we have these different categories depending on what humans thought was more relevant. For example, the fruit trees, the herbs that have seeds, the animals that fly, the animals that swim, and so forth. And this was the way of trying to organize the living organisms, but it did not fit too well with the data and was not able to give good explanations of how these things came to be. When, with a more systematic approach, it was found that there was some hierarchy in this clustering. There was species that were similar in genera, and then we could group them together in broader classes and so on, and create a sort of a hierarchical organization of these organisms. And Lamarck proposed a mechanism for how this came to be, which was organisms start to diverge, species start to diverge because organisms use features in some particular way that start to transform the features. So, for example, moles would bury themselves underground, so their eyes would become smaller and smaller, and over time the eyes would disappear because moles kept going underground. This ended up not being quite the mechanism that seemed to work. But eventually Darwin came up with this hypothesis. He even wrote "I think," and then sketched this tree where species would diverge, yes, but because of different populations accumulating different mutations over time, and so they would gradually diverge, and all life on Earth would be related by this large tree with ancestors at different levels of relationship. So this is actually the explanation that we use today. It seems to fit the data very well. It was eventually combined with genetics during the middle of the 20th century, and we have this phylogeny, this idea of the tree of life, currently very much in use to describe these relations. So how can we compute phylogenetic trees? The tree itself is a connected acyclic undirected graph. So this seems like a big mouthful, but basically a graph in mathematics is a structure that is composed of nodes and edges which connect the nodes. This is all connected because there is always some path between any pair of nodes in a phylogenetic tree. There are no loops, so it's acyclic, and it's undirected. We do not put arrows in these edges. They just connect the different nodes. So between any two nodes, there is only one unique path that joins them. So if we want to go, for example, between humans and dogs, we would go to ancestors of humans all the way to the common ancestor to dogs, and then back again in the dog lineage until we get to the dog. So there is always one path joining any two nodes. So the problem here is that given a set of taxa, of something we want to organize here, it could be species, it could be proteins, it could be genes, it could be fossils or things like that. We want to build a tree where we represent each of these elements in a leaf. That is, these are the present ones, the current ones that we are looking at. And we have some inner nodes which represent ancestral species that are common ancestors to subgroups of these elements that we want to organize. And the path through the tree represents these evolutionary relations. So here is an example. We have here cow, human, chimp, monkey, and so on. We represent this tree by looking at the groups that are closer together, their distance to common ancestors, and going on backwards through the tree. Now, there are different ways of matching the tree to other organizations that we mentally may have. Ideally, we would organize everything as monophyletic groups or clades. This comes from klados in Greek, which means branch, and a monophyletic group would be a branch of the tree. For example, humans, chimps, and monkeys would form a branch here because we could group into this set also the common ancestor of all of them. And so, for example, primates, this would be all the primates. The ancestor is also a primate. So this is one complete branch of the phylogenetic tree. Now, sometimes we think of paraphyletic groups, for example, apes or monkeys or something like that, where we could talk about apes but excluding humans. Usually we don't like to be included in these other groups. So this would mean that we have something like chimpanzee, and then the ancestor, the common ancestor of chimpanzee, we would also classify it as ape, but then we don't want humans to be classified as apes. So this gives us a strange group, a paraphyletic group, where we include the ancestor and some descendants, but we exclude other descendants. Then we have polyphyletic groups that do not include the ancestor and just pick and choose some parts of the tree. For example, domestic animals would be a very unnatural group where we could have dogs, horses, and cows all in domestic animals, but none of their ancestors or other closer cousins there. So this is what we are trying to represent here, and sometimes this matches with other categories that we have or not. But what we are trying to represent here is basically the clades, the groups that include ancestors and all their descendants. The tree itself, a dendrogram is just a generic term for this kind of representation, but we can consider two types. A cladogram represents the clades, all the branches, but does not have any meaning, does not assign any meaning to the branch length. So sometimes this is useful if we want to put some branches longer than others, just to organize the names of the species or something like that. A phylogram or a phylogenetic tree represents the actual relations between the species using the branch length. So the branch length would represent evolutionary distances as measured by whatever criteria or whatever metrics we used to generate the tree. One thing to take care of when we use sequence data to infer relations between species is that we can have different types of relations between the genes. So homologous genes share a common ancestor, but now there are basically three types of homologies here. In orthologs, the genes diverged due to speciation. For example, human myoglobin and whale myoglobin are different because along the lineages from our last common ancestor, these myoglobins were accumulating different mutations in the human and the whale lineages, and so now they are different. We can also have paralogs which diverge due to gene duplication inside the same lineage. For example, we have several different hemoglobin chains, and these all occurred because of gene duplication in our lineage, and the different proteins then specialized into different roles. Xenologs are homologs that diverge due to horizontal transfer. We have lots of leftover parts from viruses, for example. There are some transposable elements that can pass between different species and so on. So this can also happen. When we are trying to look at the relations between species using data from sequences, we need to be careful to use orthologs. Otherwise, things can get a bit confusing. For example, this glucosamine sulfatase, there is one gene for this enzyme in humans, and comparing human gene and mouse or rat gene, we can find orthologs because this protein started diverging because the lineages diverged at some common ancestor a long time ago. But in this lineage somewhere, the genes duplicated. So when we compare rat and mouse glucosamine sulfatase, we have two different proteins in rat and mouse, and the relation between them is a paralogy. So the same kind of protein we have the two proteins in rat which are related to one another, and also the two proteins in mouse which are related to one another. So this makes the tree a lot more complicated than if we only had orthologs. So usually what we need is finding some way of distinguishing orthologs and paralogs. We can assume paralogy to be less common. We can compare different phylogenies taken using different genes, different proteins, and so on. We are not going to worry too much about this. I'm just mentioning this so that you have a better idea that it may not be quite straightforward to go from sequence comparisons to finding relations between species. However, in this course, we're going to focus mostly on the algorithms, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this kind of problems. So let's see how we can compute a phylogenetic tree based on some distance measures between the elements. So we have, for example, a set of proteins. We have a distance matrix between all of these elements, and now we want to build a tree. We can do this using, for example, UPGMA or neighbor joining, as we saw before. So the algorithm is actually the same. We can use the same algorithm as we used for the guide trees. But the thing is that if when we compute the guide trees, our distance matrix is based only on pairwise comparisons, and this is not very good. So if we want a good distance matrix so that we have a good idea of how distant these sequences are, we should use multiple sequence alignment. So we do the multiple sequence alignment first and then measure the differences between these sequences. So after we measure these differences, we can use, for example, UPGMA or neighbor joining or other methods based on distances to compute trees. There are some differences here. For example, if you use UPGMA, all the branches will have the same total length. So going from the beginning to each final branch, we always add the same total length here, because we keep splitting the distance between the elements evenly, and then we keep discounting all the previous branch length as we proceed in the tree. With neighbor joining, this does not happen because we don't split the differences evenly. We take into account also the similarities or distances to all the other sequences that we are considering. So depending on the algorithm that we use, we can have different results. For example, this would be this tree computed with UPGMA. So you see the total distance coming here to each of the sequences that we have is the same, and also you can see that the branches are always symmetrical. So every time we find a branch of two elements, we have the same total distance on both sides. If we use neighbor joining, we can have these differences here. So some branches will be shorter, some branches will be longer, depending on the comparison between one sequence and all the others. Basically, with UPGMA, we are assuming that mutation rate is constant, so everything is evolving at the same rate, accumulating mutations at the same rate. With neighbor joining, we are trying to minimize the total number of mutations, or the total distance, total length in the branches of the trees. So there are different assumptions here, and if you use different methods for creating the tree, you can have different results. Now, to compute the tree from the distances, we need this distance matrix, and we need some metric for measuring these distances. So if we have the multiple sequence alignment, we can compute the distance between pairs of sequences as, for example, 1 minus the similarity, where the similarity is the fraction of residues that are considered to be similar. For example, they have a substitution score that are positive. They are sufficiently alike that even if one replaces the other, it's still similar. We can use 1 minus identity, for example. This would be the example I gave previously with the cytochromes, where we just counted the differences in the sequences, and there are many different ways that we can measure this, but the idea is that we have a value that increases as the sequences become less similar, and it decreases as the sequences are more similar. So this is the notion of distance that we have here. And now the general approach would be to do this in a greedy way, progressively, by joining the ones that are closest together, and then keep joining more and more as we go farther apart. So in UPGMA, we have that method that uses the distances and splits evenly all the branches. Neighbor joining calibrates the distances depending on the comparison with all the other sequences in the set. And then we have others, for example, Fitch-Margolius tries to do a least mean square adjustment so that the distances in the tree and in the matrix are as close together as possible, and so on. So we have different approaches here, but the idea is always the same, trying to create this representation, this tree, that organizes the data according to that matrix that we have with the pairwise distances. In some cases, we cannot really use distance methods because we may not have a good measure of distances between the elements we are trying to organize. For example, when trying to create phylogenetic trees with fossils, we may have things like the number of legs, or whether legs have bristles or not, or if the antenna is long or short or something like that, and that is not very good for creating a distance. So in those cases, we can have, for example, maximum likelihood methods where we have some model of the probability of mutations occurring, and then we try to find the tree that maximizes the probability of the data according to those models. Maximum parsimony would be try to find the tree that minimizes the number of changes that are occurring during evolution and so forth. So we are not going to talk about these methods because usually when we use sequences, it's much easier to find some metric for distances and then to use distance methods. And also, because we are not going to cover all of these methods, we're going to focus on creating these trees from distance methods as an example of this kind of algorithms, so that you can have a detailed notion of how these algorithms work, and that's what we're going to look at in the next lecture. Okay, so one final note here, which is how can we in practice visualize these trees. There is this standard format, NEWIC format, which is a text format that you can use to represent the trees. So basically, we use parentheses to indicate the branches, and in this case, we have CD close together. Then we have B as a cousin of CD, and then we have A. So this would give us this tree where you have CD here, and then B and A. We can include information about the length of the branches if we add it here. So in this case, we could have different length for the different joinings of these branches. And we can just have this in the text file. So formally, it will end on this semicolon, although some of the viewers, for example, this ETE toolkit, I think it can accept, if you only have one tree, you can omit the semicolon there. But this is the general format that we can use to store the tree. And also, if you go to these sites, you can use them to create a graphical representation of the tree. Okay, so to sum up, we saw these two things, multiple sequence alignment and phylogenetic trees. Phylogenetic trees are one case of application of multiple sequence alignments, because when we do these with distance methods from sequences, it's always best to first align everything so that we have a consistent alignment between all of the sequences. A multiple sequence alignment is an alignment of more than two sequences, and we cannot solve it with dynamic programming because the complexity increases exponentially with the number of sequences. So we have this hierarchical or progressive alignment approach, where we start with the sequences that are closer together, and then we keep adding more and more distant sequences until we have the complete alignment. We can then pass on to iterative methods where we try to fix mistakes that occurred earlier. But the general algorithm is the same. So in the next lecture, we're going to focus on this hierarchical or progressive alignment. The phylogenetic trees, we compute them, in this case, usually with distance methods. There are other methods for computing phylogenetic trees, but when you're dealing with sequences, these are the more practical. And we're going to see this also in the next lecture, because we use these methods both for creating the guide tree for the progressive alignment, and then we can use the alignment to obtain better distant estimates in order to create a phylogenetic tree. So chapters 5 and 8 cover these subjects, and I recommend that you read them. And in the next lecture, we are going to look into more details on how we can implement some basic versions of these algorithms.